Hello, everyone. It's Dan King here, as always, from Fireside Strategic. Welcome to our video cast, Humanity Builds Better Businesses, where we celebrate leaders that do transformational work within organizations, helping their clients grow and lead teams with humanity. Today, I'm chatting with Dr. Kimble Greene, leadership consultant, best-selling author, master catalyst, and trailblazer. Kimble, welcome to the show. Great to have you, and would love to learn a little bit about what you do.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's a pleasure being here, and I'm excited to talk about transformation and leadership.
Great. What do those things mean to you?
Oh, I think the meaning for me has changed over the course of my life and probably will continue to change. Um, and I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of my story later, but transformation and leadership did not mean near the same thing to me as a teen as it does now. I really believe that each one of us is a leader in our own unique way. And to be able to self lead with a sense of empowerment and a sense of who you are at your core is so important for the vitality and thriving of each individual. And then following that, our communities, our families, our cultures, our corporations, and the world.
Hmm. Hmm. The world is hurting right now. I think we need this more than ever. And we think about, just before the show began, we were talking about the outer experience affecting the inner experience. I think that's such a beautiful way to think about these issues.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been raised, so many of our cultures have raised us with an over focus, if you will, on what's happening in the outside world and trying to control and manage those things so that we can fill up the inside world, if you will. So when I say that, I mean I'm referring to the focus on things like how we look and our education and our careers and where we live and who we socialize with and our job titles and all of that so-called success and meeting those expectations is what I think of as the outside world, the exterior. And so we live very much outside in. Having been raised to believe that if we can change and manipulate those things to our satisfaction, then we will be fulfilled and we will be meeting expectations, our own and other people's. And I think that we're now discovering, as the whole world is transforming, that that's an illusion, that really our control and manipulation of the outside world is very limited. And in order to thrive, it's about living from the inside out.
I think this issue of control that you highlight is so big. We have such forced expectations of how we want these external events to unfold.
Right.
And such a huge way we promote unhappiness is when these very arbitrary expectations that are ruling us are dashed.
Right. We set ourselves up almost. And we're not doing it intentionally. We're again, this is ingrained in us, is that if you work hard to expect that you will have everything you want and feel good and think the right thoughts and do the right things. And it's so tenuous to lay our hopes and dreams and our power out somewhere in the ability to control or manage something that where most things are beyond our control, right? As we're discovering.
The Stoics figured this out years and years ago,
Right.
right? And yet it's a lesson that as more modern people, we need to relearn and relearn.
Right.
Struck also by how in this particular moment, it's even easier to emotionally invest in things that we can't control. And perhaps partly because there's just so much that we can't control in this moment. It's like the illusion is suddenly shattered. And yet, if we don't do that work to build that inner muscle that you're speaking of, that inner ability to thrive, and I'd love to hear more about your approach to getting there in a second, we're in even deeper shape now as a result of this pandemic moment.
Right. I think one of the things the pandemic has done is pushed us out of that world, that outer world where we relied so much on our external activities and roles and identities. And that really got shut down in large part for most people for a year. And we were forced to retreat and have access only to our immediate families and homes and inner world, and manage so much more of our thoughts and feelings and expectations based on just ourselves rather than that safety net of all of those external structures, friendships, jobs, socializing, entertainment, all those things. So our worlds got turned inside out.
Mm, totally agree. How do we build? I'd love to get to next. How can we build this inner strength that you're speaking of? How can we do things in a different way?
So we all have the inner strength. The I call it power versus control. So we all have that inner power, and for me, it's about um, learning and strategizing in new ways, right? So over the past number of decades, I've immersed myself in research on, I call it translational research, because what I've done is I've taken ancient philosophies and sciences along with the new age philosophies and sciences and translated those into a language and practices that empower people to um, successfully manage their own world without having to rely on those outside resources unless they choose to. And so for me, that research has focused on areas of science like epigenetics and metaphysics, neuroscience, and transpersonal psychology would be the four that probably most inform my practices and methods today. But really, the point being that we are not broken because we failed to achieve a certain goal or fail to meet expectations that have been set for us by our families and our cultures and our workplace. In fact, we are more powerful than we realize. And now it's really about turning inside to reconnect to that
Mm,
power that's always been there.
mm. I love that. We are not broken. What powerful words that I think we really need to hear.
Yeah.
Before we go deeper into some of the concrete tools that you offer clients, would love to learn what started this journey for you. What sparked your interest in walking this path?
Oh gosh, I would say the most memorable starting points for me are as a teen. And I think for most of us, our journeys are just a progressive building of experiences, right? So as a teen, I can remember feeling really lacking self value, really lacking a
Mm,
sense of self at all, not to mention feeling badly about myself. You know, I had a tumultuous childhood, like so many, a lot of disruption and um, emotional issues at home, I guess you could say. And coupled with the pressures teens experience in school, the peer pressure, and kids can be mean. So a lot of judgment and bullying by other kids, right? Um, so that led me to, at the age of 18, when my first year in college, I actually tried to commit suicide. And in
mm,
hindsight, I had no interest in dying. I wanted the heartache to go away. And I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know who to talk to. I felt judged by friends and family and the culture. And I had bought into all these expectations of who I should be and didn't feel that I was. Um, so that was really one of the pivotal points in my early life. And after that, I decided that if I didn't want to hurt anymore and I still had to be here, then the best way to do that would be being tough and strong. So I
Mm.
shifted from being very um, emotionally what I thought of as impressionable or weak to being overly tough and hard and strong. And after
Mm.
college, got into the juvenile justice and prison systems for my career, and very quickly became a warden of juvenile prisons before I was 30. So, in some ways, being tough and being strong served me, right? So, again,
Mhm.
the expectations, this is who you become, and this is how you succeed. And it was in my early 30s that it started to dawn on me that, yeah, I had done amazing things with my career. And yet, personally, I was no better off than I was in my teens. In some ways, I was worse off. I still had no sense of self, certainly no self love or self value. My relationships were a mess. And again, at a loss for where to turn and who to talk to. And at the age of 35, which I would say is my second pivotal point in my life, I happened upon a counselor who had a very alternative spiritual focus. And for the first time in my life, she taught me about concepts like intuition and inner knowing and wisdom and spiritual intelligence and personal power. And that's really where my journey to where I am today began.
What a powerful, rich collection of experiences, and such a, I imagine, powerful foundation for so much of the work you do
Mm,
today, right?
yeah.
Um, if you're open to going there, I know that this is a subject that not everyone is comfortable speaking about, but intuition is one of my favorite subjects to talk about in interviews. When you think about intuition, what do you mean, and how does it show up for you if you're open to going there?
Oh, absolutely. So I believe intuition is our sixth sense and our most powerful sense. We are raised to understand very clearly our five senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell, right? And we're taught that that's really primarily who we are. As a matter of fact, our early science that has informed so much of our education and our health systems was based on what I call Newtonian science, which said we were primarily beings of cognition and matter, and that we had limitations because we're human and we're physical and we could only go so far. I've since learned and immersed myself in the world of the metaphysical, what is beyond this physical existence, right? And that's our intuition. And our intuition is that connection to all that exists, the wisdom, the intelligence, the life, the energy beyond our physical bodies. And in fact, frontier sciences, the new age sciences such as epigenetics, have proven that we are so much more than our beings of cognition and matter, and that in fact we are primarily beings of energy and belief. And that
Hmm.
is where our power is. And that broadens the horizon, that expands our potential and who we are limitlessly, because we can change not only our inner world, but our outer world simply with the power and energy of our thoughts and beliefs. And our intuition is very much connected to that.
Hmm. Can you expand a little bit on how you view intuition as a tool for changing the external world?
So our intuition, and everyone experiences this. So how many times have you done something in the same way you always do, like drive to work, right? And one day something in you says, I think I'll take a different route. And then your brain kicks in and says, why? Just take the shortest, straightest way to work that you always do. Why would you want to change what works, right? And then on your way to work, you have a flat tire, you run into, a traffic jam, something happens. And you think, why didn't I pay attention to that little voice in my head that said, do something different? It happens to me, even though I've been practicing and I'm very, have fine tuned my intuition for like 20 years now. I still ignore it. And it happens to me all the time when I think, why didn't I just pay attention to the little voice in my head that said, do something new, do something different? So that little voice in your head is your intuition.
Hmm. Very cool. Yeah. Um, so it's interesting. As beings of energy and belief, I'm curious if these are new concepts, perhaps for some listeners, right? And they're
Yes.
starting to get adjusting. They're adjusting perhaps to this notion that we're beings of energy and belief.
Right.
Um, what's a way for them to start to do that? How can they start to create some openness to a new way of seeing how we are and how we are in the world?
So, because we are dual beings, physical and non physical, energy and matter, um, we have capacities in both aspects of who we are. As we've discussed, most of our lives, and for decades, we have focused on our physical capacities, the human side of who we are, and have really left alone, or put aside the spiritual or energetic aspect of who we are. So it exists. There's nothing people have to do to go find it, to fix it, to generate it. It exists as part of who you are. And the best way I can tell people to do that is to start to use your imagination. So Einstein,
Mm.
who is one of the most prolific scientists and researchers of all time, right? Um, Believed more in the imagination than I think anything else. And he realized through his research and his experience that everything that exists in the human world begins in someone's imagination, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we create first in our imagination, which is not so much the brain, that's more the intuition and the spirit energetic aspects of who we are. And those visions, those imaginative pictures become linked to the process of the brain to turn it into something that exists in the physical world. So it's
Mm.
our imagination that takes a concept that is non-physical and begins to translate it into the physical using our brains and our cognition and our bodies. So imagination, intuition, the little voice in your head, those two things are not fantasy and not to be brushed off as childlike or unimportant. In fact, those are your higher intelligences, if that's even a word. Those That's where your higher intelligence lives.
Yes.
And that's where your power is, really. And as leaders, when we step into fully who we are from the inside out, and lead from that perspective using in equal parts your intuition and your imagination along with your brains and your intelligence and your experience. Those two things coupled together creates the evolutionary leader.
Hmm. I love that. And as we start to kind of concretize how this work shows up for you in the world, the kinds of work that you do with leaders, what sort of form that takes on, I think this is beautiful background to keep in mind. And so if I'm a leader or an organization and I hire you, how do you put these philosophies into practice? What exactly happens?
So the first thing that happens is I teach people a little bit about the science in terms and language that are easy to understand, because I am by no means a scientist, a mathematician, or anyone that understands the technical world. So for me, I need to understand it in very simple, practical terms, right? One of the facts that most fascinated me as I've done this research over the years is that over 90% of who we are is subconscious.
Mm.
And that's leaving less than 10% of conscious accessible activity during the day, right? So think about that. I mean, that is a huge number. You're talking about 90% or more of who you are being subconscious, things you are not aware of on a regular basis, and less than 10% of usable material, thoughts, feelings, and actions that is conscious. So change begins by tapping into what are the subconscious patterns, neuropathways, if you're going to use a scientific word, that are running in your head like tapes that were established very early on in life based on your original perceptions of how the world operates, which included where and how you were raised, along with what you were exposed to more globally, right? And understanding that those tapes, based on those perceptions, are your core beliefs that run subconsciously. In most cases, those old tapes no longer match who we are today. Certainly 30, 40, 50, 60 years later, the world has changed. Your world has changed because you're no longer a child dependent on the adults in your life. And you're no longer in the circumstances that you were raised in. So you've become someone completely different. You've evolved. The world has evolved. And it's really important to evolve those subconscious tapes, those outdated core beliefs, so that they match who you are today, what you're capable of, and what your goals and dreams are. So that's where it begins, is understanding a bit more of that science, how we
Yeah.
got to be who we are, why we believe the things we do, not even knowing those tapes are running, right? So one more important aspect of that is every behavior, feeling, and thought is derived from one of those subconscious tapes. So one of those underlying core beliefs is generating every single thought, feeling, behavior we have every day, all day long, thousands of them. And so when we're looking to change something that's blocking us, a repetitive thought that's unhelpful, a feeling that we don't like, a behavior that isn't working for us anymore, we need to change the core belief that's connected to that. Otherwise, that 90% of us is going to compel us to return to the old thoughts, feelings, and patterns that we recognize no longer work for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I'm sort of connecting what you're saying now to an earlier point in the conversation, one of the dangers is our 90% beliefs, problematic ones, can be reinforced if we're focused on our mind's narrow interpretation of the external world in any given moment, right?
Right.
We need this internal strength to be able to say, this thing that appears to my mind, that's not true. What's
Right.
true is what I believe deep down. What's
Right.
true is what comes from this deep inner strength and resource that I have within me. And
Right.
I'm going to choose to believe that, not this thing that these seeming facts that are manifesting in my external world.
Right. So what's true is not only the core of who we are, but what's true for us also changes from decade to decade and over various stages and transitions in our lives, because how we perceive the world changes based on our beliefs. And it's really important to make those subconscious beliefs conscious, which is a very simple, straightforward process. And so you're aligning your present day conscious beliefs with your subconscious beliefs. Then you have 100% of your power at work for you, which is also generating thoughts, feelings, and behaviors designed to achieve your goals. Versus when you have outdated subconscious beliefs that are still running like tapes, 90% of you is working against the 10% that says, but wait, I know that I need to do this, think this way, feel this way, act this way to achieve my goals. Why can't I sustain that? And then
Yes.
we start to think there's something wrong with us because we can't sustain all these positive thoughts and new behaviors and things that we're told are good for us. And it's
Yes.
not, again, it's not because we're broken or there's something wrong with us. It's simply that there are tapes running in the background that we don't realize are running that are compelling us to think, feel, and behave in certain ways. And we need to change those tapes.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to whether organizations function the same way as people in this respect. If they're made up of people, do organizations have subconscious beliefs that are controlling sort of 90% of their behavior? And can those be identified and shifted?
Yes. So everything in our world is representative of what we bring to the table, right? And that's energy. So everything in the world is made up of energy. Let's back it up and say scientifically, everything that exists is made up of atoms, whether it's things in nature, things in our bodies, things we build, our thoughts and our feelings and our actions. Everything is a form of energy. It vibrates on one level or another. So the energy that we bring to our lives and specifically to our roles as leaders and to corporations is a reflection of how we show up, the energy we bring. So a
Mm,
corporation then is going to be an accumulation of the energy that everyone in the workplace or on the team or in the C-suite brings to the table. And if that's not working, if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't look right, it's not simply about changing strategies or changing what's written on paper or changing procedures. It's really about taking a look at, well, what beliefs am I bringing to the table that I don't even realize are part of the energy that is
mm,
creating this unit,
mm.
this team, this corporation. So everything that exists is an extension of the energy that we bring to it. So um, fear, doubt, lack has a very clear energy signature. And because we've been raised across the globe in cultures that teach us to rely on outside in practices, who you become, what you choose, all of that has to be managed on the outside, that we are powerless unless we step into these expectations, right? There's a lot of fear that's generated that we don't even realize is fear,
Yeah.
because we had the fear comes from this disconnection from our power, our core power, and this reliance on control and manipulation of the external world. And that's a scary place to be because we understand that there's so much beyond our control. So the energy, the vibration of that underlying doubt and fear and lack of, and feeling powerless, right? Is what contributes to the energy across the globe. So if you imagine that those underlying fears and doubts show up as an energy signature, that's going to manifest in the world as anger and violence and war and prejudice and racism and all of the things that we find so difficult and ugly and unpleasant and ungraceful. And to change those things sustainably and deeply and permanently really means to change how we see ourselves and how we operate. So to begin to
Mm,
operate from the inside out, from our power instead of our control, is going to be
yeah.
really important for sustainable change.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love it. I think that's super, super powerful messaging for our audience. So as we start to come towards the end of our time together, Kimble, just a couple more questions that I'm going to throw at you. I'm curious sort of what's next for you as you think about this deep work that you've done in a variety of different fields, from metaphysics to neuroscience to the work you do in leadership. I'm curious sort of as you look at this year, what you want to achieve next. Is it is it exploring a new field? Is it working with more companies? Like what's on your agenda?
Gosh, that's a big question, Dan. It took me so long, I feel like, to get here, struggling with my own identity and sense of self and finding my inner power for the first 30 to 40 years of my life. And then once I discovered that, stepping into that authentically and completely, the next 20 years. So I'm in my late 50s. So it's really just been in my 40s and 50s that I've come into this clarity and this knowing and my own power. And that's where I started to generate my methods and philosophies and write the books I've written. My method now in working with corporations and C-suite teams and individuals is called the Monarch Method. And I named it Monarch because I love the dual representation of who we are as people. Transformational, energetic, non-physical, represented by the monarch butterfly, and then
Mm,
empowered and impactful and influential, represented by the monarch lion. So
mm,
my approach really balances those two things. And I just want to do that. I want to live into that. I want to reach more
yeah.
people with that message and that wisdom and those learnings and those strategies. And I'm so loving that right now. And I'm loving the people I'm meeting and the connections that I'm making, that I can't see myself doing anything other than expanding on that for certainly the next year, if not the next 5 or 10 years.
Fantastic, fantastic. So glad that you found that deep alignment that you were looking for
Yeah.
so long.
Which we all look for, right?
Oh yes.
We all want to understand what is our purpose and how can we live our purpose. And it's so much easier to get there than anyone really knows.
Hmm. In closing, when you're not working with companies, when you're not working with people, when you're not putting into practice the Monarch method, what do you do for fun?
What do I
How do
do
you
for fun?
relax? Yeah.
Well, for me, believe it or not, fun is writing. Um, so I love to write, but in a more real way, I guess, nature, friends, loved ones, experiencing the world, exploring new places, traveling as I meet people, animals. I love animals. Anything that connects me, that reminds me of my connection to the metaphysical, to the non-physical, whether it's imagining or connecting to nature or an animal or just feeling the pureness of a love or a laugh or a glass of wine or a good dinner. Trying to live in the present and being acutely aware of the gifts that so much of our lives have to offer, whether they look like gifts or not. There's so much opportunity. So that's where I try to live every day.
I think that's a fantastic note to end on and a beautiful place to live from. So, Kimble, it has been a pleasure having you on the show, learning from you, a super, super rich conversation.
Thank you for your time, Dan. Thank you so much. And thank you for what you do through Fireside Strategic for the whole world.